The Adeptus Mechanicus are currently an army that is getting a lot of attention and a lot of players interested into getting into the army, whether it's the slew of buffs that we've had over the last 2 years to the most recent that spiked our win rate to a pretty astronomical level, to Richard Siegler just winning Worlds with an Adeptus Mechanicus army. All eyes are kind of pointed at us, and some people who maybe were a little bit hesitant and had cold feet to start this army are now interested in finally taking the leap. That said, this army is one that is notoriously hard for collecting and also painting, so it's not something that people really just do to, say, meta chase and just grab something really quick. It is something that is going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of money. That said, I'm going to outline exactly how you can get into the Adeptus Mechanicus faction in a fairly less painful way. There really is no way to avoid that. You kind of have to give a kidney, but there are means, they just aren't the best. Let's start out with the thing that is supposed to help you get into armies pretty decently, and it's the combat patrol. Now, the Adeptus Mechanicus combat patrol kind of blows big robot dick, but fortunately it is still a discount. It is roughly about 25 to 30% if I'm remembering correctly, and it gives you about 270 points. It is not favorable, but it is optimal. The reason that I say that is because the box comes with a pretty good selection of units that can be used across most of the detachments. For example, you will have a Skitarii squad, which is something that you absolutely need, and you get the Taraxi, which are one of the most flexible units in the Mechanicus army. Then you get a Tech Priest Manipulus, which is the best leader that we have. Not the best character, that would be Call now, but he is the best leader for what he can lead. And then finally you get Cerberus Raiders or Cerberus Sulphur Hounds, which are good utility units. If you don't already own something like a Servitor Battleclade, you're getting them here for a discount. They also are our more pricey box with only 3 of them for about $60, and I think they're about 60 points. I also think that this box is a box that you could get 2 of and be pretty happy with. Maybe your wallet won't be, but you'll get a pretty good skeleton to shift either fully into something like Skitarii Hunter cohort, or take at least 3/4 of it into something like Halo's Creed or Cybernetica cohort. Now, at this point, it comes down to what you think your playstyle is. You can basically go into any detachment from this point if we are considering the fact that you are going to buy at least 2 combat patrols. But I would mention that the easiest way to get into playing a game, getting them down on the table and just figuring it out, is probably going into something like Halo's Creed, because it is the generalist detachment, it is one of our better detachments, and it supports basically anything you need, so it also helps you with the rule of cool thing if you just want to fuck around a little bit. The reason I mentioned Halo's Creed for getting onto the table very quickly is because you can build a list, say with 6 Cataphron Breachers, a Manipulus, 4 Castellan robots, and a Cybernetica Datasmith with some enhancements that help them out, and your list will be about 800 points already, and that's just for about 14 models. Now obviously that's not where the AdMech strength comes from, but it is a playable list and it's pretty decent at that. If we consider the fact that you bought the 2 combat patrols before that, you can add the 2 Skitarii and the 2 Taraxi into this list, alongside with one of those aforementioned Tech Priest Manipulus that will be leading the Breachers. Throw in maybe a Cerberus Raider, and you're looking at a list that's about 1,170 points, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good start, all things considered. At this point too, your list will probably have like a pretty good amount of damage dealing, so you could just start building utility stuff like, say, Sicarian Infiltrators or Sicarian Rust Stalkers, which as you build towards that point, you are also building towards the other detachment that is more favorable, which is the Skitarii Hunter cohort. Now, I don't know if you're ever going to get to like 60 Sicarians building a Halo's Creed list, but it does allow you to get into that. So before we start building like a 2,000 point list, let's go over the points cost of these guys. Unfortunately, there's kind of no way of getting the bulky things that I told you in a discount, unless you can either find the 9th edition combat patrol, which came with 3 Cataphrons and then the aforementioned Skitarii, as well as an Onager Dooncrawler, or if by the grace of God you can find the Elimination Maniple box, which is extremely good alongside the combat patrol, because you will get 1 Call, which is a very important unit. You'll get the robots, you'll get the Cataphrons, and that will flesh out the bulk of your list, while the combat patrol will supplement it with all the little utility units. Unfortunately, like I've been mentioning, this is kind of where you just hit a dead end, because short of the combat patrol, our savings are pretty shit. So you're just gonna have to raw dog buying most of your list. Again, if your objective is to just get them on the table, I would consider going for the Cataphren Breachers and the Castellan Robots, because they will fill out your points quickly. But if you're trying to optimize, it's going to be a grueling process, and if you are just chasing meta, I would implore you to double think what you're trying to do here, because it is not an easy task to get into this army, especially getting them built and painted. There's really no other way to kind of continue this point. It's just gonna have to be get the combat patrols, think about what you kind of like to play, and then build towards that, because everything from that point on is just gonna be individual boxes. There's really no discount box that you can lean on like say Drukhari could have with the Raider box. In terms of alternative avenues that you can take, there's always going to be things like mini swap, things like eBay. I would consider taking those into consideration. I've gotten my Cataphrons through one, going to auctions that my local LGS holds. There's some LGSs that are able to sell models that people have like built but not painted and stuff for a little bit of a discount. I would consider looking into that. Otherwise, and this is a point that I'm going to make with some caveats, 3D printing is always going to be an option. I know that 3D printing isn't a thing that everyone can take advantage of, nor do I believe that 3D printing is just like a, oh, just get a 3D printer. It's definitely not that. 3D printing comes with its own slew of problems, and it can be a mess all of it in itself, especially if you don't have a dedicated space for it. That said, I would heavily look into 3D printing. Whether you feel great about it or not, at some point, like, this army does kind of just become unaffordable for a lot of people, unless you are trying to build it over, you know, years. Just to kind of put things into perspective here, every 10 Sicarians that you buy will be about $100, right? I bought an Elegoo Saturn 4 Ultra, and it's a very expensive printer at that, for about $400. Since Elegoo does have a lot of sales, that happens for like almost every occasion. That said, buying 40 infiltrators costs as much as a Saturn 4 Ultra, and this is if you're deciding to just dive off the deep end and get something as big as this. But I'm able to then print 60, so let's say 30 Ruststalkers and 30 infiltrators, as well as I printed out my breachers, and I printed out a Scorpius Disintegrator, and then I was able to continue to use that printer for literally anything else. Like, my half of my Chaos army is also 3D printed, so it's a very harsh initial price to entry. But that's if we are going straight into something as big as this. If you can go into something way more affordable like the Mars line, and those will cost you maybe like $150, $100 if that, with the ability to not only print but to learn how printing works, get it, see if you like it, and if you don't, just sell it. You know, it's not too hard to find somebody who would be willing to buy something like that. I'm not trying to like doomsay and just like push 3D printing on people, but a lot of people will say that it's expensive and then go and buy half of an AdMech army through GW product, and that is going to cost more in the long run. I understand that some people also have like the stipulation that they don't like their things to look too wacky, and I'm one of those people. I try to keep my 3D prints as close to the base model as possible, because I like it to be on theme, you know? And there's definitely some creators out there that can do that. Some of my favorites is the Omniforge line from Red Makers. I absolutely love how these things look. There's also the Daka store has some really cool machine cult priests for the Fulgurites and the Corpuscari. And Wargames Live has a pretty good alternative to the Taraxi if you just want to build mass Taraxi spam. And then when you're done printing these, obviously you still have use for your printer. It's not like it's completely worthless afterwards. So just to show the point, here's a couple of the Chaos stuff that I printed out alongside with some of the bundle boxes of Veterans of the Long War. So just to kind of bring everything together, if you're trying to go raw dog, get into Mechanicus, probably buy a box of Skitarii. Like, just see if you can even tolerate painting this army, because it is a very harsh one to do so. And then I would probably go into the combat patrol At that point, you will have 3 Skitarii squads. You'll have 2 of the Taraxi, 2 of the dogs, 2 of the Manipulus, and that's a pretty good start to kind of take it wherever you want to go. At that point, if you have access to Tabletop Simulator, I would probably play a couple of games through there to see where you want to take the army, but I would recommend going into Halo's Creed because you can kind of do anything with that detachment. If you want to go into filling your list as fast as possible, you can go into taking Cataphren Breachers, which would be my next purchase. I would probably buy 2 of them because the 6-man squad definitely fills your list pretty harsh, and that's like another, I think, 120 bucks. And then you can go into double robots, which is about 160 if I'm remembering correctly, and that will get you like a pretty sizable portion of your Halo's Creed list. I think it's about 1,200 points, maybe a little bit more than that. And at that point, you'll have about 1,000 points. You can play like a smaller size game, see if you like AdMech, and see if you'd be willing to get something like a 3D printer if you enjoy wargaming. If you're like brand off the press, have never wargamed before, and you want to get into it, I think this is the point in which you decide, do I want to 3D print this army to fill some stuff out, cheapen it out, and then maybe cheapen future purchases if I decide to go into another army? Or do you want to continue going into, you know, the GW path of selling a kidney? Again, to kind of summarize, there is no easy way to do this. A lot of them, you're just going to have to faceplant yourself into buying 6 Iron Striders individually for some reason, and then just accept the fact that that's how it is. Or you could try to push off a little bit of that cost with something like a 3D printer. Thankfully, there are ways to get into this army very quickly, but you will hit a point where you just need a bunch of little trash to do things, and that's when the army gets very, very expensive. Of course, if you have any questions, you can join the Discord. I'm pretty active on there with a lot of my community, and I also share a lot of the 3D stuff that I print, as well as just the stuff that I buy and paint there too. I'm more than happy to give advice into how to get into this army. If it's not obvious enough, that's basically the existence of this channel, is what the hell is Mechanicus? So I'm more than happy to answer anything over there. Basically, TLDR, this army is very expensive to get into. I wouldn't meta chase it just because it's good for now. It's been good for 8 weeks. It was bad for 2 years. Please don't make any bad decisions like that. That said, if you like this video, please consider liking or subscribing. I hope I didn't get a little too rambly there, but I'm just kind of shooting this one off the hip because there's really not a lot of things that you can do to get into this army cheap. Right, it's all just going to be the normal advice of look in eBay, maybe try to 3D print. Right, that's all you can really do. The only thing we have is the combat patrol. If you are able to find elimination maniple, fucking windmill slam that thing into your cart. It is one of the best things that you can buy right now. That'll do it, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. A special thank you to all my patrons in the Engine Seer tier, and a special thank you to the Fabricator tier with Sig Lawson Jr., Dr. Jones, Sekartor, 3X01, 74th Inquisitional Task Force, Megalio, Rising Grace, Dr. Doggerino, Lead, Exotic Spoon, Valanquare, Isaac the Rat, and Forgeworld Tempestari. Thank you, guys.